They have a high end.
Oh.
I would do that in Harlem just to.
We're trying to get that to happen, because that may, there's a propensity in the meeting. Everything will be fine. So we can get definitely back or is this, very good, thank you. Did those?
Oh.
Wendy Hill?
I haven't seen it.
Did that get answers to your?
I need to.
Your question was
How do they go back to Jesus? Talks about how we matter.
I didn't think that.
Netflix, I'm sure it's hard.
In the back.
I've got a question for you. Sorry to interrupt. I saw your post on Flatbridge this morning.
Oh, you're right.
When did it open?
We always open Memorial Weekend.
Oh, and
What time is it?
Every day. 8. Well, they 9.
well, and then I.
5:15. I'd like to welcome everybody out to our city council meeting for Wednesday, June 20th. I'd like to start by apologizing for my attire. I had an allergic reaction this morning that caused some restriction to my airway, so I'm not wearing a tie today. I hope the council and staff will forgive me for that today. We'll go ahead and start with item 2.1, review of this evening's agenda. Are there any items that need to get adjusted or moved on this meeting?
Mayor, if we just make a brief comment about, to have Cody Stromberg talk about 3.4.
Okay.
So in our discussions with our vendor who will provide RMS and CAD configurated dispatch services for our police department as we come online, they had originally indicated to us that it would take them 12 to 18 months to stand up our server for that. So we were exploring some other options to meet our needs in the interim period. However, after we published this agenda, we actually have come upon a different avenue that's actually going to be much more cost effective and efficient for our needs. And so the interlocal that you see that was in the packet with South Jordan City, in staff's opinion, is no longer necessary, and we would ask that that be stricken from the consent agenda.
The consent agenda?
I believe it's 5.5 in the agenda.
3.4 was meant to talk about it, and it's on the
Okay.
meeting, and then I just want to get that off the table.
Does council have any issues with skipping 3.4 and then making, can we do it and then consent simply removing item 5.5 in the motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we eliminate other items as well.
Now that you know that's an
We are
option.
going a good direction.
Wait, the next thing, Mayor, I do have a little bit of a on-site field trip at 6:45 to run out of here and go to the south entrance of the city hall.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say any more than that, but I think you'll be pleased with what we have to show you.
Okay, fantastic. All right, any other items that need to be addressed for our meeting? Okay. Item 2.2, future agenda items. Any items that need to be, that the council would like to see addressed in the future?
Just one, I sent the email this last week about some sort of expiration date or deadline on future development agreements.
Yes.
So
I had that same question about doing this.
I support.
So in the
Discussion
future
on
meeting,
that?
we'll discuss that. I'd also like to have a report from staff regarding Wasatch Front Waste and Recycling and our relationship with them and what options that we have in regards to a possible new waste management service that might be coming online that we had the presentation from Herhoff. I know that we've had some discussions about what it would take to send our trash that way, and I just would like to get a report back on where we are in that process and what it would take. And so if the council would be amenable, I'd like to
Do we want Wasatch Front to come, or do you want the board member of Wasatch Front to represent that? That's been involved in that process?
I'm happy with either one. I just would like some
I
feedback.
would initially defer to our
Yeah, I think
representative and let you make the decision of whether that's.
Yeah.
You think you have the information to I guess, provide this been requested, or whether you would like someone else to accompany you in that.
I'm fully supportive of
Yeah,
that.
I know that they discussed, the Herhoff at the last
So,
board,
in the
last board
future-
meeting, and so the next board meeting will be Monday.
Okay.
And so I'll have plenty to provide feedback.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate it. Any other future agenda items? Okay, great. We'll go ahead and move on to item 3.1, discussion of Senate Bill 136 relating transportation governance. Tammy.
Okay, so if you wanna pass those around. So at the last meeting, we had discussed this ongoing, we've had this conversation for the last few meetings, but it needed continued. You had requested that we see if, Andrew Gruber or Representative Schultz could come and speak on this topic. Representative Schultz is out of town, and Andrew was unable to attend this evening, but he did send Lenise Davenport, in his absence. So before I turn the time over to Lenise to answer any additional questions that you've had, I did want to show you the statistics of who's voted thus far and how they've voted. Riverton was also set to vote last night, but they chose to not vote. Draper voted 4-1, and Sandy voted 4-3. So at this time, they do have 68.4%. They only needed 67 to be able to move forward. So it looks like it most likely will move forward, but I think it's still important for you to get your questions answered so that you can determine what your position is on this item. That being said, I will turn the time over to Lanice. I know that Andrew, we sent him a bunch of questions that you had asked. He did respond to them, but Lanice will be delivering the same information. So I emailed each of you an attachment, but she has it so that she can hand it out to you if you didn't get to print it out. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy. Third time's a charm, right? Okay, here's a paper copy of the handout. I'll go ahead and if you want to take one and pass that way. And then I'm an organized person by nature, so I find that if I have talking points in the form of a PowerPoint, that helps. I thought I'd make copies for everybody else, so you can follow along. Really, the idea here is just, I think it's helpful to remind ourselves what the local option sales taxes are, and we can go through this very, very briefly. I think the important part of this conversation is really that it is a conversation, and you can ask questions, and we can hopefully try to clarify information to ensure that we're all on the same page in terms of the local option sales taxes under Senate Bill 136. Again, I think, you know, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, we're the area regional planning organization, metropolitan planning organization. We're not an advocate for the local option sales taxes. We're really just here to provide information for you. So I want to put that out there up front. Okay, so let me start. I think one really important thing to remember about the local option sales taxes is that the state legislature basically gave the authority for local governments, this includes cities, towns, and counties, gave you all the authority to impose sales tax. You can't do that on your own. You do need to have that authority from the state legislature.
Was that authority given to the cities or was that authority given to the county?
Well, for the local option sales taxes, for the whole host of them, it varies.
Okay.
It varies by
By which option we're talking about? Okay.
But in the broader sense, it can go as low as metro townships. So I'm not gonna get targeted just yet on that one. And then also, when I talk about the short term for local option sales taxes or the quarters, right? We refer to these as the quarters. And the reason we do is because they're worth 0.25% tax for each quarter. So first quarter is 0.25%. The second quarter is 0.25% sales tax, and so on until we get to that fourth quarter. Please interrupt me with any questions that you have. So just moving on, just a reminder what Salt Lake County, what the quarters are that have already been imposed in Salt Lake County. You'll see on this top slide here, the county has imposed the first, second, and third quarters. And this just gives you a brief explanation. The first quarter was for transit projects in the early 70s. The second quarter was to fund road or transit projects, transit capital projects or service in the mid-90s. And then the third quarter is so far has been the most flexible funding option that can fund roads or transit. Okay, so now that gets us to this bottom slide here, what's eligible for imposition. And as was already stated, just last night we found out that the Salt Lake County met their goal of getting the supermajority or 67% of the population of the cities within the county to support a resolution that would go to the county to impose the fourth quarter local option sales tax. This option is also very flexible. It's a 0.25%, so basically a penny on every $4. And it can be used for road or transit projects.
Can I ask a question to that?
Of course.
So you say what it can be spent on. I've also heard that can it be spent on other infrastructure? Like what? Like anything apart from roads? So any other development infrastructure, or is it strictly limited to roads?
It's transportation infrastructure.
Okay.
So it does need to go towards transit, active transportation, which includes pedestrian and bike paths or transit.
Trails, yeah, okay.
And we can get into a little bit more project details too. So just quickly, before we move on, and we're going to go into a deeper dive on the fourth quarter here in just a minute, but I wanted to remind you now that Salt Lake County has imposed all 4 quarters, it does open the door for this new 0.20 local option sales tax. The statute is, there's certain timeframes for that imposition for that quarter. I don't wanna go into a whole lot of detail, but I wanna just let you know that that is now open to the county. Okay, so let's move to the next page.
Have they given an indication at this point as to what they would like to see that new imposed portion used for?
No, you mean the county?
Yes.
No, I don't think, as far as I know, that any conversations have even taken place on the new 0.20. I think really everybody's just really been focused on this 4th quarter.
So on this 0.20, is it under the same restrictions, road, transit, active, all of that?
It's actually specific to transit.
Oh,
That one is specific
And
to
transit
transit.
would include,
So this is service or projects.
so buses, express buses, rapid bus transit,
BRT,
track line,
light rail, front
light
runner,
runner,
bus stops,
basically anything under
stations.
UTA.
yes, under the transit district, yes. And it doesn't even spell out UTA specifically, it really just spells out a transit district.
but given UTA is our transit district.
This is true.
Let's just call it what it is.
This is true.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, so let's do that little bit of a deeper dive. As mentioned already, so the county needed that 67%. They currently have the 68.4%. I think it's important to note that only 2 communities so far, Copperton Metro Township and then Bluffdale City, were the only 2 that have actually that opposed it. And then Riverton and West Valley both did not take action. So
West Jordan.
Where's
West Jordan is meeting tomorrow
Meeting
morning.
tomorrow morning.
Special meeting.
On this issue,
On
the
this.
agendized issue is this one.
Yeah, David Ricky, their city manager, administrator, and mayor are anxious to see what we do as well tonight, so they want a text message.
Yeah, getting down. All right, so in the statute, so in Senate Bill 136, it actually clarifies that for the first 8-month period, from when the county can actually officially impose the 4th quarter, which starts October 1st of 2018, through June 30th of 2019. So for an 8-month period, the funding does go to the county, and that equates to about $40 million. The statute, like I said, tells the county basically how they have to spend this money. They've said that they would spend about half of it, $20 million, to pay down debt, and then the other half would be to pay regionally significant projects.
How is that defined? How are they
Yes.
determining that?
Determine regionally significant projects. It's in code, and it's literally the most confusing language ever.
That does not feel well with
But we can talk about it more. I've got a list here that we can talk about. But it's things like new construction of roads, widening of roads. It's collectors, arterials.
Is it new
Highways.
service on bus routes?
It's capital. Yeah. Yes.
So like new
Yes.
routes
Yes.
that are referred to areas that are not currently served.
As far as I know, yes.
Good idea.
I believe that's correct.
I believe so too.
My follow-up to that would be is who has the decision-making authority over what
Is considered.
is considered regionally significant?
So the county has actually, and you probably have already seen this, Amy Winder Newton has sent out a description of the process that she thinks that the county would follow in distributing that $20 million for regionally significant projects. And basically what will happen is it's an open and transparent competitive grant process. Cities would apply to it, and then a committee would be created that would include representatives from local governments outside of just Salt Lake County. And they would decide how that money gets distributed. I imagine it would be through that committee to decide what would be considered a
So
regionally
no one
significant
entity will have sole discretionary decision-making over that
That's
money on those
If-
projects.
If they
right.
follow that process, I think ultimately the county does have that authority to make changes at the last second, just like a city council would in regards to a planning commission. But I think they're gonna try to follow that, and it tends to have worked well. I believe they're gonna try to follow the same model they do with like the ZAP.
TRCC.
And the and where it's, those kind of things where they generally accept the recommendation of that body. and kind of let it go through that more transparent, less political process so that it's actually serving the communities that need it and not pet projects of one or another. Now, there's always the risk, so.
Also of note, during this 8-month period of time, no money does go to UTA. The intent or the idea there is that through this period, UTA has yet to really see the changes through its new governance. So the board will take, the new board of trustees and the new advisory board take effect on November 1st. And so no money will go to UTA until those changes have taken place.
But they could certainly, sort of earmark the money for UTA until the 8-month passed and then give as they chose. I mean, there's no saying that.
Maybe, yes, maybe. I imagine that they could,
If they chose
if they
to do
chose
that.
to do something like that. After July 1st of 2019, that regular distribution applies. So after July 1st of 2019, this 0.10 to the cities. So Harriman City will get 0.10, which equates to about $376,000 a year. The transit district will get 0.10, and then the county will get 0.05. And then that remains in effect, for the life of the local option sales tax.
Which equates to what?
So for Harriman City,
I see the Harriman City, what about the transit district and the county?
transit district about 24 or 25 million.
Yeah.
And then Salt Lake County, I want to say it was about 12 or 13 million. Sure, yeah. Any other questions?
But this is ongoing funding that could possibly be used for service. And it's not one-time money like a lot of these projects are. This is ongoing funding that can help sustain it.
It's an ongoing tax.
And
But
thank
it's
you.
also an ongoing tax.
Right, and thank you for that. As another reminder, the county has said with this ongoing 0.05% that they will distribute that basically to the cities through this competitive grant process, just like they would with that initial 8-month funding that they'll get.
Is that in the bill?
It's not in the bill. That's something that the county has said that there's like 8,000 people in Salt Lake County or less. And basically it doesn't make sense for them to try to keep all of that money for that small amount of, population. And we've heard over and over again that they have said that they will they'll give it to the cities through a competitive grant process.
It's neither here nor there, although I'm surprised that the bill itself doesn't look beyond the first year because the uncertainty, there's a certainty of tax, but the uncertainty of the purpose is unnerving a little bit. I mean, I think it would have been easy enough to articulate in that bill what the ongoing distribution of that would look like. So it's just surprising.
Yeah, I second that, because what they say and sometimes what happens are not always the same thing unless it's actually in a document, in something binding, there's nothing binding
Because
about that.
it goes to the county, there's nothing that says they have to do a competitive
Yeah.
grant process. There's
Nothing.
the chair can say this is our intention, but there's how many other members
Yeah.
that have not said.
And it's my understanding that this ultimately is gonna go through the county council as part of their budget. And so as part of their budget, the county council has a lot of control over what's done with what, because it's just a budget line. And so I would hope and I believe that they would try to do their best to stick to the words that they give, but at the same time,
Those
as
people
we know,
change.
we know, a current council cannot find a future council. And so there is always that concern of that changing the future.
I guess, if I can just respond to that a little bit too. I mean, just to play devil's advocate, right, like the cities are getting 0.10, and this, the legislators aren't telling you how you have to spend that money. Once you get that 0.10, you have a pretty broad spectrum of how you can spend down that money. And the county is given that same broad spectrum. And they're the ones, the county has said, okay, this is what we think to do with this. So it is up to the county, really, ultimately.
But we live in the county.
But the point you made that there's only 8,000 people and that's shrinking, and they get such a large portion, it's just.
Yeah. And they are our county, that seems to somehow constantly be overlooked, just because we live in a city. We still live in that county, and we still pay taxes to that county, and we still elect those people who represent us in that county. So somehow there's continually this disconnect between those facts, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
We definitely shouldn't be okay with that.
But as it's been at least verbalized at this point, there's theoretically, we'll get the amount that comes directly to the city and the opportunity to compete for another 12 million.
That's right.
It's out there theoretically.
You're right, and for larger projects, right?
Right.
And I'm gonna
Sorry.
step in front of the council here. We're gonna actually have this whole conversation again in the general meeting in front of the public, and so,
Well, I wanna make one comment
Yeah,
before you move
please.
on. I will just say this in theory though, the way this was set up was from the state legislature to the county, who then pushed it down to the local level. We are then making a decision facing our residents, and of course, we have to do that in some part based on the bill language, and then where there's ambiguity in the bill language, we have to trust what the county says. So we're taking a vote on trust, which I get back to my wording of unnerving. What I would like to do is we look to this, if we choose to vote in support of this, I would like to articulate in our resolution something beyond just the simple support, and outline what our understanding is of the usage of the money based on both the bill language and the assurances that we have been given, because those assurances, in addition to the bill language, are everything I'm using to make a vote. So to me, a simple resolution of support doesn't cut it for me. I would like an amended one that calculates in how we view that spending, because I wanna articulate that to the residents.
Some expectations.
Some expectations of what that fundings look like based on the assurances we've been given, asking for our support. So I would like something in more detail is what we're saying.
I would be supportive of that. Okay.
Just the last couple of things here, the types of projects that can be funded with that fourth quarter, it's pretty broad again. And then lastly, you asked for a list or for some idea on the current projects that we have as the Metropolitan Planning Organization. You see that last slide on page 4 is our existing regional transportation plan, so the projects in that plan. And then the last page are the projects that are proposed for our update that looks through 2050. And these, you'll notice they're not phased yet because we haven't gone through that process yet. And of course, this is all done with you and through you and your information and your help, and so we just want to remind you that we really appreciate that. Okay,
Thank you.
okay,
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
I'm
very much.
sure we'll have more time to
Okay.
talk in
Thanks for
our
coming.
general meeting.
Welcome, thank you.
Tammy, did you have anything else you wanted to add on that particular item?
Not unless you have any other questions. I do know that Gordon, we had a list of road projects that could benefit from this. It's a could. I don't know if you want that list or.
So, but again, getting back to my point of expanded resolution, I would even love to see an addendum attached as to projects that we feel fit this loose definition of regionally significant, because again, those necessary projects to meet the growth in our area, which is very necessary to meet the state's goal of growth, are why we are vetting this and looking at this with our needs in mind. So again, I would say that when we consider this, that be an addendum. We've done our homework, we understand what we need to meet not only the growth we're seeing, but also the state influx of growth as well.
So in her PowerPoint, she listed projects in Harriman, Parkway, 118, all those are gonna be significant, the U-111, the Backus Highway.
So if we were to pass a resolution, having those included as part of the resolution to make it clear that those are the things that we are,
That we view as regionally significant.
and would expect some of this funding to come back and to support.
Yeah, and I think the way we would see that is just like the state transportation funds, it's up to us to argue our case
Sure.
each time before, I don't think
Yeah,
they'll
so
ever
we
get to a
understand the
screen.
process. That being said, we're looking with an eye to our needs as we look to transportation money potentially flowing in. So I think to not articulate that, again, doesn't give a full picture as to what we as elected officials are looking at to make a decision.
So we could put together a list of all the projects, just email them to you, and you could read them off or say attach this one.
Yes.
That would
That's
be great.
great.
We'll
That
do
would be
that.
helpful.
Just kind of note I heard too is that the portion the city gets, if we were to raise property tax to get the $375,000, that's over a 50% increase in property tax, which we all know would be
To cover the 300,000 that
the
would be coming in.
350,000, so you would be,
376.
And I don't think any of us would ever be willing to raise property tax by 12%.
Nor would our residents.
I know, so I'm just giving you kind of a context is, we don't have to raise property tax, but there is an opportunity to use funding.
And this is, sorry, Brett, and this is earmarked to transportation needs. This doesn't go into the general fund, it does in fact, go towards the,
Just maintenance right now, so I'm just saying,
sorry, Brett.
Brent, did you have anything you
I
need to
did.
add? Okay. All right, well, in that case, we will go.
Really
It
good
was
too.
so important,
It
way
was
important,
brilliant. I'm so
way more
convinced.
important than anything I said, so.
I will,
I felt like I was pain in my back or something.
We will go ahead then and move on to item 3.2, discussion pertaining to the 2018-2019 Harriman City tentative budget. Alan,
This is just another chance for questions.
and today is the final approval, correct?
Final approval. Now, one thing as we go through the approval, we do need to in our motion, approve the addendum I gave you last time as well, so we can find the police as part of
From now until July 1st.
July 1st, and then we will come back to the full budget for 2019 as we get some of the numbers ironed out, so.
What item is that in our regular agenda? Item 6.1?
6.1.
Have we received any questions from the public that since I've been off? Okay.
So certified tax rate came in where you anticipated, Alan?
Yeah, it's down a little bit from last year.
So we're lowering tax rates?
Well, as property values go up, the tax rates
rate
go
goes
down to equalize it. So our rate's going down a little bit this year.
But their tax liability is not changing, it's not going
Their
up.
tax liability should not change, unless their valuation changes at a greater or less rate than the rest of the city. But we're accepting the, state tax commission's, proposed tax for us, which means no raise for our residents. It's just exactly what we've had. As was just mentioned, we generated about 700, just short of 700,000 in property taxes last year. So to increase property taxes, the 376 is half of, again, what we've done, so. But we are not proposing a tax change at all for our residents.
Okay. Any other questions for Alan?
No other than what we're doing on the police side of things, I don't recall any other significant changes from the
No
tentative
other
budget to
changes.
now,
No.
correct?
No.
Well, thanks for the work you've done on that budget, Alan, you and Tammy and her staff, and
Tammy's group's the one that made it look good.
it,
They added all the color.
Made it easy to read.
it
I appreciate it.
made it easy, made it much easier to view and understand. I've been very pleased with the budget process this year.
I actually want to make a comment on the budget. I've been very impressed by the comments I've heard from all of you as council, the questions you've asked early on in the process. I remember one Friday morning, we talked on Sherry and her questions and her understanding because the way it was put together. She grasps what we're doing on, talking with lease on a vehicle, and what we do with that money, how it's coming on the revenue side, and why it's 1.5 times the cost of the vehicle for the first payment. And so I thought, you guys would be really paying attention and reading the documents, so we do appreciate that.
It's our job. It helps that we have great staff that makes it easy for us. So, all right, we'll move on to item 3.1, water impact fee adjustment, or sorry, 3.3. Sorry, thank you. Water impact fee adjustment policy discussion. Justin.
So if you recall several weeks ago, I brought two different items to you, an impact fee reduction and then one an adjustment. So you asked that we make a policy and put one together. So in your package, you'll see one. If you have any comments, we can discuss it now. Otherwise, if you have any comments after you read it, you get back with us. Brad, myself, and Alan have a copy and we'll go back and forth. But I just wanted to bring it, make it aware. So if you have any comments on that, just get back to me. Otherwise, we'll move forward and put it into our standard operating procedures. So,
My question would just be, is since we've had that discussion and you've had a chance to now formalize it into a policy and, I guess mull it over from your perspective, do you see any tweaks or challenges that may come with those that we need to address?
No,
As we take this next step
I
on
don't
that?
think so. It's fairly specific, the way it was written in the policy, and so they have to meet basically the criteria that you guys approved, otherwise it won't be approved. And then everyone will come back to you for your approval anyway, so.
But it should speed up that process,
Yes.
we'll know that it's gone through this formal process that point.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you for staff's effort on that. Okay, all right, we will go ahead and skip item 3.4 as that is no longer necessary. Item 3.5, review of the Anthem Commercial Development Agreement amendments. Gordon.
So John's been working with us on some amendments to the Anthem agreement, so mostly it's to codify what we've already done, so I wanted to kind of explain. John Brands.
We're just making sure we know which attorney we're talking about.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have is an RDA in the Anthem commercial area. The anticipated revenue coming from that's about 14 million. The amount that would go to Anthem commercial would be capped at 11 million, depending on how much infrastructure they do. So there's about $3 million that would come to the city. So one of the things that this will work is that the way we split the money, so if a dollar comes in, we'll split it percentages to each other. So we get dollars all the way through the process. Once they're paid off, then we get 100% of it. The second part of this agreement is when they came in, we gave them a waiver for impact fees on anything except for Walmart. We're gonna keep all that for our improvements. But that had a sunset clause of 2021. And so what we've done is gone back to them and said, instead of doing a 100% waiver, we're only gonna do a 75% waiver. And so we're gonna put that into this agreement, and we wanna bring it back to you on the 11th.
And how was that received?
Everybody's happy.
And did
John's
that,
making problems, John Perez, but other than that,
Yeah.
no, John is not. He's been finding solutions for us to get this all into an agreement.
that 75% on the impact fee, that adjustment there, is there a sunset clause on that as well?
So we get 100% if they don't, anything built after 2021.
Still 2021.
So there is incentive to move the project.
The whole thing is to move.
Yes, which again,
It's
Center
important.
Cal just opened, so just gonna leave that hanging out there. Lots of revenue.
Lots of
Into
revenue.
Riverton.
Thank you for bringing that to our
So I'm
attention.
happy to put that on the plate.
RDA,
Hey, Nicole, do you wanna talk more about that?
the RDA will also be doing some agreements because it's going to reimburse those impact fees, that $3 million that came in. So basically, the city will never be out any money, it will all be paid back. But it'll take a little bit of time, that's all coming through.
And that's an important message. The city will be paid back.
So every dollar goes
We
in,
don't-
but we get a dollar back.
We don't lose
Plus the-
anything.
Anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but that's the broad brush of the agreement. We just didn't want you to hear it. So we'll send you out in the packet, the agreement to look over for next time, and then we'll come in and if you have any questions. John, did you want to say any more to that?
Nope.
That was the John I was referring to, and he wants to say no more about that.
Okay,
Alright.
all right. We will move on then, we're making good time today. Item 3.6, the Rocky Mountain Power Franchise Agreement discussion. John?
Okay, so, as 3.7 is Wendy will handle, but as part of that, well, what that is, hopefully I won't take.
Should we
You just
skip to
go.
3.7 and
So-
go concurrently?
You want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay, so somebody wants to put some art on the power boxes, and you've seen them around the city. And
I've seen them all.
that's Rocky Mountain's property. So you have to approach Rocky Mountain and get permission to do that.
So maybe we'll have Wendy speak to this picture.
So, and I'm not sure what John's running into, but you've seen South Jordan has this program now, Park City has this program, or Park City's just rolling theirs out this summer. South Salt Lake has a program, there's some up north, and basically they're just intended to communicate visually, make something that's not so attractive maybe more attractive. There's a lot of different ways you can do the project. You can do it with community art, or you can do it with your own art. We talked about taking some of the events pictures and making them look like artwork and wrapping the boxes or doing some other kind of city stuff. So there's economic development might also be key in this. So
With that option where you're talking about events and a wrap, can you then do a kind of a turnover process where you're changing the look
You can.
regularly?
you can, and you can wrap them or you can paint directly on them. I prefer wrap.
For all the reasons that it is
Yeah.
I do too.
temporary. Yeah.
The only thing that I heard from the cities that I talked to that are doing this program is just to keep it really simple, not too busy, not too pollution-y of the visual space, because it's already a pollution problem, but for visual pollution, but to do a lot of stuff in a small area makes it even worse, so.
One of the very positive things about this that I've seen in our communities is our utility boxes get tagged with graffiti. And you don't see them sitting long because we get out and clean it off. That's how you battle it. But part of that sometimes we get can be totally clean. So we have this agreement where we go out and repaint them or wrap them with Rocky Mountain Power. Then that, here again, as soon as it gets graffiti, we change the look of it.
So it's not a good idea to solicit like local artists kind of things to do
It's a
that,
great
or do we
idea.
have to just do wraps?
If you want to put your art on that.
Well, I mean, one of the things we could do is we could go
Yeah,
out
you don't
and
want my art on
solicit
them,
local
but-
photographers, because oftentimes photographers, would have something that would fit, that they could submit and give us an agreement to use, and we could do the wrap for them with their photography if it matches the sense of community.
But I was thinking that then it wouldn't always be a cost to the city. Every time something comes in, we have to do a new wrap. It's a new cost, $300, right? But if we could solicit some local artists, it allows them to display their talents, and it doesn't have to cost the city every time something changes on it.
Personally,
Right.
I'd like to see some of the high school students involved in this.
The life of the wrap is about 5 to 7 years. So if you wanted to pick a few, maybe to change out every so often, yearly, let's say, you could certainly do that, but then have some that are more longer.
Sure. And maybe
Can I make a comment on joining local artists?
Mhm.
Once you give it up, you have no control. what they put
Anybody.
on there.
The same idea with banners.
You-
Then
you can't have-
anybody can do.
You can't have a guideline, a policy of this is the only thing that can be on there.
No, not with art, because it's free
It's
speech.
open day.
Got ya.
So Park City, for example, their program is called Empowerment, and it has specific guidelines that they will set. And they have a committee that decides which projects they will accept for their boxes.
Have they been legally challenged?
Well, they're just started theirs in May, so they're
To
just
John's
collecting
point.
artwork
Got ya.
now.
So you could be discriminating if you didn't accept this or that.
But
Right.
it's,
No,
We're
that's
making
why I
the free
threw the
speech
question out.
element.
Yeah. So it's really a decision, do you even care? I mean, some people like this, and some people don't even notice the green boxes. If you go back a slide, Alan.
I've not noticed a single decorated
You will
box
now.
You will now,
anywhere.
you will
I
now.
will be looking for
But
it.
when you
take
look,
this.
this one's right in front of City Hall,
Our
it's
report
right out
conversation.
here. This one's at Rosecrest Park.
Does it interfere with their labeling for security,
You
or for
have to keep
safety?
the labels
in place.
visual.
Yeah, that's
You can't cover them up.
But going forward with an agreement like this doesn't preclude us from not doing anything, it just gives us the option to do something.
Right.
So we can move forward and then we can work through particulars if in fact that's the direction.
You would have to budget money first to do
Yeah.
anything. This just gives us the ability.
To look at the option.
I think this is an opportunity to increase the level of community feel that we have, so I would be supportive of at least moving to the next step.
Yeah, likewise.
okay, now to 3.6. So their request to us is, well, while you're doing this, why don't we renew our franchise with you? And it's 1 year early.
Are they increasing?
There's no change.
Percentage.
There's really no fee with this. They get to go into our roads. And
Are there any concerns from you or staff in regards to updating it?
That'd be great to work with.
So they're just saying from an efficiency standpoint,
Just-
we're visiting something, why not just, okay.
The only area utility we had problems with, we took about 2 years to get that franchise agreement redone because we had issues with it.
my pencil just wouldn't work.
They're a great partner. Great
These
partner.
franchises are generally for 20 years. So the city's been here 19, so it's well, it's 20 years, but the franchise was here. Technically, we could wait one more year and do it, but we're pushing this down the road, so Brett and I never have to deal with this again.
Sounds great.
Okay,
Thumbs up on that.
all right, any other questions for item 3.6 or 3.7? All right, with that, we will move on to one of our favorite topics, item 3.8. McHouston Avenue project update. Blake, I hear you had some fun out with some residents out in
an audible.
I'm glad it's your favorite too.
I said one of. We care about the safety of our residents.
Get on the recording.
I believe you accomplished your objective.
Okay, so McHouston, just a quick update. Putting a timeline together to show what we've been doing. So these are all the most recent things that have been going on. We're discussing it tonight. I even got tonight's on there. Look at that.
So
That's
efficient.
Efficiency. So this is mainly to come back and tell you about some site meetings I had. So hopefully this presentation will be given to you several more times as we work through this. And
Did you
so
say hopefully?
hopefully I can use this same presentation if I have presented this.
Be given to us several more times.
We've got this presentation.
hopefully I won't ever see this
This
again.
is all about less work for Blake.
This format's gonna stay the same.
Gotcha,
So
alright.
you'll always see the map.
Perspective.
Here's the map that shows all the properties and how they work. The red one is one we'll go through. The colors mean something. So this is the whole project. So the first one is the red project. It's part of a pre-approved or approved development already. They will be coming in soon, I believe. Their plans are going through review, really close to approval. And they will build that piece of road and dedicate that right away. Or they'll pay a fee and move forward.
Look at that resident being a good partner to our city.
It's part of the development, so.
Still, but they're not fighting us on it, so gosh darn it, thank you for being a good partner. I'm
They
trying.
definitely got something out of that deal.
I'm trying here. I'm trying.
Okay.
And this will be just phase one. This side and the other side of the road will have 30 homes in phase one.
Yeah.
So.
I was looking at the positive things, that's all I was trying to do.
So the next property is the one on the south side. And when we had the meeting, the neighborhood meeting down in the community room,
Which color one is this?
this is green,
Green.
and it's all green on this one. He gets property back. But he also has, I don't know if this clicker's working very close. He also has this piece of blue property along there. He owns this field and this house.
So he's gonna.
So this is give up property, this is get
Get
back
some
property.
And he actually looks like he comes out ahead.
He does, but his arena there is smaller than a typical arena, riding arena. Doesn't want to have the impacts, so he would like us to look at modifying the cross section a little bit, which I have some suggestions on that at the end here where that could work, and we could possibly save any impacts to his arena. There's a nice fence that he's put in, some things like that. So
Show
those
me
are his
where the
proposals.
arena is, so I can make sure
It's
that
the
whole
white
piece. Yeah.
So it's this blue strip along here that's about 4 feet, 5 feet into his property.
So if you do, I'll let you do.
Go ahead.
Keep going. So the next property over is this home. I have not had a site meeting with that resident.
Which piece of property is it?
It's right
So
there.
it's that
Green piece,
sliver
the blue
of tra-
piece.
It's that
kind of-
sliver of blue piece right there.
They would get some property back and give some property to the city on this one. Haven't heard from this property owner, haven't met with them. They did not come to the
Right.
meeting, so,
I think that's the only one to pay. But what does that mean? I know.
yeah. That's,
It doesn't really impact their fence really hardly either, and the trees from the stakes look like they pretty much stay too.
and I'll get into the staking in a minute here. I'll just keep going through these. This is the next property owner. This gentleman was kind of against the project in the neighborhood meeting. We've reached out to him a few times.
Did
I
he
tried
not
to set
want
up-
it developed, or what was his reasons for that?
He's worried about impacts to his property
Rightfully so.
and I guess what he gets out of it. So what's in it for him?
Paved road.
A road.
Paved road, yeah. That doesn't seem to be enough.
You haven't
Drainage.
spoke with him since then?
No, we tried to set up a neighborhood meeting. He said he was out of town one day, then he said he was on vacation. We told him we'd call him back on Monday, and some other things happened on that Monday, and we never called back, so. And this is another thing with the staking I'll get to in a minute.
Okay, yeah, because it looks fine with the staking.
And then that property owner has been that way since we met here
Right.
in the building, so it's just been
Hit and miss.
hit and miss.
this property owner, I met with him on site, while I was meeting with his neighbor. And he actually already has pavement, curb and gutter in front of him.
Right.
And I asked him what his thoughts were on sidewalk coming along and if he would deed the property to the city, and he said he'd given up enough already, which I don't think anything's been given up yet, but said he'd given up enough and that he wasn't gonna work with us.
So what you're saying is he hasn't given anything to the city yet?
No, he's got curb,
Yes,
gutter and
curb, gutter,
pavement,
yeah,
but
he just doesn't
his
have
property
sidewalk.
still goes to the center of the road, so nothing's been given up to this point.
What does
But
he
there is
think
pavement to the
he's,
side of the road in front of his home.
when
But
he
that's
says
what
that,
he
what
thinks
does he
he's
think
given up, but
is what?
curb,
He wants us
gutter,
to write him a
pavement.
check and put a sidewalk.
He just thinks he's given that up because they did put those improvements in. The only thing they did
So
was
he
put
paid to
the
put in the
sidewalk.
improvement for the road.
No,
So
the
he's not,
developer across-
he's not seeing the improvements as a benefit, he's seeing the improvements as a give by him.
Yeah, I
The
think,
willingness to allow the improvements to
Yes,
happen.
that's what I'm
is-
saying.
yeah.
I
He's seeing
think
that
what
as his
happened
gift.
was when they came in with the road and all that, they negatively impacted his driveway and things like that, so he incurred quite a bit of cost to fix some of the slope problems. Because I think it wasn't done correctly, is from what I can see.
But,
Obviously, if they did curb gutter and pavement and didn't get any right of ways,
let me ask,
something wasn't done
Yeah.
correctly.
if everyone else besides this individual agreed, there would still be a paved road all the way through and a curb that children could walk behind across this property.
You could get sidewalk all on the north side and just not have it on the south side.
But there would be a safe walking route through this community if everyone else except for this individual agreed.
There already is a safe walk route.
Right. But that doesn't go across dirt roads?
No,
But that doesn't get us, I think, to where we as a council were at first going into this, which was all of the right of way dedicated.
right?
It's true. You're absolutely
Unanimous
right.
support,
Mhm.
so that we can move forward.
That's always, at least from my experience, it's always been
It's always been the hangup.
the hang up with this.
These are the hurdles, so.
It's okay, keep moving.
We'll keep
and we'll
moving
talk
along,
about it.
so next one on the south side, this gentleman, he was very against it when I first met with him. After we talked, he has some farm display equipment out on front, and he just didn't want us to touch that or move it. So looking at the stakes and how they were in, I believe we can miss it with a slight design modification narrowing of the park strip.
Sidewalk that goes like this.
Well, I'll show a cross section here in a second. Now jumping to the north side of the road, working from the east to the west. This gentleman, he was totally fine with everything. He said he was okay. He was ready to sign when we brought the deeds. So
Fantastic. Look at that person being a good member of our community and a good neighbor.
just to note, when we did the asphalt sidewalk, he said the same thing, but when we showed up with the deeds, he wouldn't sign it.
Maybe that's because he's had some interaction with some other people.
Yeah. 'Cause there's a piece of that asphalt walk that doesn't tie into with the existing sidewalk right there.
Which I think just speaks to why we need to have everybody
Everything in
on board
place,
to do
yeah.
it, you know?
Keeping going, this resident, we have not had a site meeting with them yet.
Which one, you gotta keep pointing out the
Is this
pieces.
This is this piece,
That's
he
okay.
owns these pieces, N
They
40 and
front
N
off
50.
of
The yellow or the blue?
It's,
I can't see anything
it's
else.
all,
reading
it's all
there.
blue here on this north
Okay.
side. The yellow is, part of it we're getting through, the storm drain easement.
Purple, right? It's purple.
It's blue on the original.
It's so small when it's so
Feeling
far
like
away
all of a
from
sudden
us.
I've got color
Blurb
blindness.
that.
I saw orange when he said red, I saw purple when he said blue, I was starting to think I needed to go.
Bigger maps.
There was
Bigger maps.
there was a
Just so
previous
we're
city
clear,
council
alright,
member
it's
that
not
I
me.
couldn't put red and green on.
That's right.
Too much Red Bull.
So, moving again to the east, this one is, these blue parcels right here, there's three of them, N 20, 21, 22. I met with him out on site, he seemed to be pretty in favor of the project. He saw the stakes and said, oh yeah, this is gonna benefit. He's been kind of against it in the past, but he sounded pretty favorable when we talked about it. And then the next property is the one on the corner. She owns this whole parcel. She understands she has a mess back here. Her dad lives with them and he collects things.
Peacock one.
And,
Yeah.
and she
They don't have
is
this.
letting him keep things there. So they would like the cross section modified. It does go right through a bunch of the trees. It impacts the back of their property quite a bit.
Yeah, a ton, huh?
And so we looked at some things through there. She's like, if it has to be done, it has to be done, but if you can skinny it up, that'd be great. She's actually very, very pleasant to work with.
Good.
Very willing to work with us on coming to a solution.
Yeah, so I was confused about, it did look like it went way farther north, like if you look at the maps on the other side, it doesn't look like it impacts them near as much as it does these guys on the corner. Is the road off, or is it just the way it looks?
We'll talk about staking,
Okay.
I think now. Well, so when we went out and GPS'd it and put it in with the GPS lines and all the county surveyor markings, it looks like they were shifted off, because on the far east end, when they set the stake that lined up with the back of sidewalk is actually about 2 feet south. And so I need to probably go get a real survey done on it. We haven't done an actual topographic and boundary survey, so I think that's our next step, because we were trying to lay it out with the county records and stuff, and it just didn't work out as well. So when I went out there and looked at that, I noticed that we needed to do something, so that's why I haven't had any more site meetings, because the stakes looked like they were off.
Yeah, I thought it did look weird.
In both directions, in some cases, so. So this is our typical 60-foot cross-section on the top, and mainly, look at the little thing on the right that shows the park strip. It's 6.5-foot park strip with a 5-foot sidewalk is our typical 60-foot cross-section. To get this to fit, we would skinny it up to 55 and go to a 4-foot park strip, which would leave room for snow storage and streetlights. It's a little tight though for trees. We typically do a 5 on most of our other cross sections. This is our only cross section that requires a 6.5. But this would pull everything in and save the riding arena.
As a general rule, I'd say that I would defer to staff's recommendation in these cases, as long as, we're following what we've already said as we get the right of way.
We always worry about a narrow margin. We've had to settle on those in other places, but every time we settle on them, they just don't make the road look right. That side is aesthetic, but there's also other issues. You get too narrow, you can't keep a tree that's sustaining itself there. If you talk about a 50-year tree there, you're gonna have problems if you go around and everything. Your sidewalks, go look at the avenues, they're lifting 2 feet high. So what we wanna do is make sure if we do that, and we do require certain trees to be planted there, but you wanna be very practical what we're doing. So if we narrow it in, we wanna eliminate the type of landscaping that goes in that.
Okay.
That's fair. On a normal street, like a 50-foot street, what's the park strip?
5 feet.
So all park strips are 5 feet.
It's just because of that reason,
Right.
it really limits what you can do with it. And we do,
Burns
if
the
you go
grass
to
a little
there's
bit.
no park strip at all. If you're plowing snow for the city.
No, I agree,
You
yeah.
put the snow in the street and then it narrows in the road and you got a
Yeah,
one-lane
it's a
road.
problem.
It's really hard if you get narrower than this to get sprinkler heads that don't spray your road. You can get sprinkler heads that spray 4, but 3, 2.5, you just can't find them.
So-
You end up watering your asphalt.
So what we'd look to you, as we move down and get closer to this, is there's probably some logic in maybe not having it all sod, but having some sod and some rocks, and maybe some more rocks, kind of to,
And some rock.
Well, I don't think that they're gonna wanna do sod most of it anyway, cause it's just,
yeah,
it's
I
not
guess
a
that's
lot
what I
of
was trying to get
maintenance
to. This
kind of
might be
thing.
all rock, with some trees in there. So,
I think based on the,
that's not what we've talked about yet, but we need to get them.
I think based on the challenges that we're facing, just trying to get this in place, recognizing that our normal cross-section obviously is the 60, and that's what we prefer for all the reasons already pointed out here. I think we have to recognize this is a challenge for a whole lot of other reasons, and that doing something that's a little bit different from our normal modified cross-section in order to accomplish that and accommodate some of these crests that might get the people, those residents that own this property in the area to do so, I think is reasonable. And if, from an engineering standpoint, it is acceptable, then I would be in favor of looking at a modified cross-section that would try and keep moving this process in some forward motion, which is struggling right now.
To show our support of the community as well.
I
But
agree,
again-
I'm gonna say it this way. This is a big pain in the butt, and if we can find a way to make it work and they all agree.
Done, right. But I go back to what I said a minute ago, this still requires
And they all agree.
that they all agree and we get the dedication
But it also shows the city's,
do this.
it shows the city's willingness to make concessions
Yes, compromise.
that
Make it work.
ought to show that we're trying to meet in the middle and we need them to come.
Absolutely.
Agree.
as well.
Absolutely. And this keeps the roadway cross-section the same, so the traffic is still handled. And, I would never recommend this in a new development, but is infill, this is where we can do
Sure.
this. So that we don't have the development.
Like I say, I
community
think
come in
that's where
and
we
say,
recognize there are certain challenges that we're trying to continue to work through here.
Alright, so I think I got clear direction there. So the next steps is to probably go out and get an actual survey done. Put the design together with this modified cross-section, restake it, go out, meet with the residents again, walk through the design with them, prepare the deeds, get things going. So I think that's
It
the
sounds
direction
like,
we're heading.
it sounds like that process really helps a lot of them to be able to visualize it, see where
Yeah.
the lines are.
Yeah, I just got a little nervous when I saw the one stake a couple feet off from the sidewalk, and I was like, that shouldn't be there because it should line right up with the back sidewalk. And I checked for an offset, there wasn't an offset stake, it was an actual stake to the back
And
wall.
being around Harriman the
Somebody's
last
not-
30 years,
I'd like it better
we've
here.
seen property lines off 30, 15 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, GPS is great, that's what's in the county coordinates, what we go off of, but when you start getting out with the real survey crew out there, spending more dollars.
You get a much more accurate, but it helps
Yeah,
avoid
I
issues.
think it will look a lot better on Jackie's piece on that court, on that piece. And Harry's piece, the one at the end where the equipment is this cross section the reason it fits there, or is it not necessary with the farm equipment?
We would have to do this to get by there and
Okay.
not touch
But
his
that's
little
good, and
mound
I
up
think
there.
he'll be good at that. They just-
And he was also very great to talk to and work with. There
He's a nice.
several people along there started out as obstinate and then came around by the end of the discussion and were, you know, actually totally in favor of the project.
I think that the hard part is that you are the city and you've gotten the bad name, so from the second you open your mouth, they're just already mad at you, you know what I mean, and so.
You say, I'm Blake, I'm a surveyor.
Yeah, yeah.
Had my orange vest on with the city logo on it. If I wouldn't have worn my vest, I'd have been just fine.
And so that's
The second I open my mouth. I'm in trouble.
I don't mean that, I just think that's the case, you know what I mean, and so it's probably just gonna be exactly that. Hey, Jonathan too, because he's really good at dealing with ornery women.
Okay.
I need some advice. I need some advice.
Yeah, can you come to my house?
Whole section on the council on this.
Let's
Do you
just
need
stop
any
this
further, do you
conversation
need
right
any further direction from the city council at this point?
Nope.
Okay, so you have the direction you need.
There was
We got this
budget,
at 9 p.m.
there was budget allocated for this project for $380,000.
Okay,
So I may dig into that budget to pay for this survey and
do it right.
design. Well, the design's gonna be done in-house.
Okay.
So we'll save funds there, but the survey is probably gonna be somewhere between $4,000 and $10,000 of that. So we'll remember that if we go for $10,000 over budget at the end.
Okay, all right, thank you. We'll go
I
ahead and.
just wanna comment too, it burns a lot of their time, so just making sure you know this project's an extraordinary effort, that's all I'm saying.
Okay,
Thank
all right,
you, Blake.
we'll move on to item 3.9, which is again Blake Autumn Crest Road update.
And this will be a lot shorter, I think. Got a presentation for this one as well. Autumn Crest Boulevard extension. So this project is the one that we received funding from state legislature and corridor preservation funds. The blue portion is Harriman City's portion. This is the new high school, Rosecrest Road. North is to your right. And then the yellow portion is Riverton's portion. And then.
Have they finalized their alignment on that, and willingness to move forward?
Yeah, the alignment's finalized, we're ready to go with everything. We were hoping to go out to bid late spring, early spring, somewhere in there. We kinda hit a snag with negotiations with the property owner on some drainage outfall. Riverton's had some issues with, working with the Army Corps of Engineers to reroute this creek. They wanna push it back so they have more room for development along 134th. They're having a tough time getting anything done there. So our concern is the high school and the new elementary school both open August 2019. And we wanna make sure we get this road in place before then. And it's starting to bring up a little concern to us. So we met with the property owner. We're in the process of getting them some deeds for this drainage channel that will run all along the Welby Jacob. And it actually goes into Riverton and discharges into here to discharge the stormwater for our road, for all their future development, and for the schools. And, it's been kind of a hang up, but we're working to get there. But there's a risk that if it takes much
Too long.
longer, then we're not gonna have this road open by fall
So-
2019.
Let me ask you this, is the other, because we can obviously only control small portions or half this road. Is Riverton also moving forward with the same haste to get their portion done, so that's done when high school's open? Because it's obviously, the high school's gonna serve their community just as much as.
The whole goal, Mayor, from when our first reports on this was when we're together, did it all out together, it's the same contract.
Okay.
We've met
That
with
was-
them several times, they are working in haste, and that's what spurred the meeting, is when they started getting hangups with this channel relocation. We started talking about 138, they really want the funds to go to this piece of road. They don't wanna use it for a connection into Bluffdale. So they're gonna continue working forward, I just wanted to bring you up to speed on a risk item here that we're looking at. That if that is not open when school starts, this traffic to the high school all comes down, goes down Rosecrest Road, in and out, so
If I remember correctly, the last time we talked about this, the big hangup was the drainage issue, so that's been solved, it sounds like.
It hasn't been solved, that's what's holding it up, is the negotiating the property for that, the easement. And, we actually had some issues with the discharge rate of how much water can actually go into the channel. Jonathan has been working with the county on that one, and we seem to have gotten that one cleared up, so now it's back to the easements to get the channel put in, so the water can actually get from point A to point B.
So you say we've been negotiating with the property owner, is that going well?
The ball's in their court right now, we've given them everything they've asked for.
How long has the ball been in their court?
2 weeks?
1
week?
Yeah.
Week and a half, I think.
Okay. That's fuzzy.
Who's Wednesdays?
Who's the property owner on this?
Suburban Land
9
Reserve
days.
and PR, or CPD.
Cause it doesn't seem very safe
know.
at all
I just
for
wanted to
fire or police response or anything to not have that road there, if those schools are open.
Schools
that-
work under the state, so we'd have to ask the state fire marshal
So-
about that one.
It just seems a little sketch.
To have one entrance and exit
Well,
for
you
a school.
can't have one, you have to have two, don't you, but
Well,
Maybe we should have.
when you're talking residential, there's clear things there. When you're talking
Government
schools,
can do whatever they want.
It's different because it's under the state fire marshal's office.
So maybe we could,
I would still think that they would.
make sure that that's being addressed appropriately with the fire.
Yeah, the building's sprinkled, so that solves a
If
lot
you
of that.
sprinkle it, there's things you can do.
But it's response, what if
No,
there's,
I-
what if there's a
medical
shooting,
You are
what if there's
100%
anything
right,
like
Sherry.
that, they gotta have access to that.
There's
And everybody
literally
trying to
one
come
way
out and
there.
everybody going in, yeah, that's insane.
Can we just, I would ask, maybe in behalf of the council, that we make sure we're following up with the state fire marshal, just to make sure that.
Well, I know, and Chief Pilgrim can take this back, I believe that the one thing that entity does have some say and control over in terms of that is safety. Now, how you formulate that and characterize that and work with that there's some discretion there, but I do think that to the points that have been made, there is some true safety concerns that will come about if in fact that road is not in place, and it would be well to have the representative from UFA
Yeah.
be working in concert with State Fire Marshal's office right now to know that that is a concern on potential delay of this road getting done.
Yeah, I'm just saying, any
said that
kind
so
of
much
pressure
better.
that can be put to speed this along, same with Chief Carr, I mean, it's the same thing for police
That's what I was
officers
just thinking.
responding. That's a huge safety issue in my opinion, and might be able to push that
And
landowner along.
if it's okay with the council, I might reach out to our school board member, Daryl, and express the same concerns as well, just so that we're all working together, in a very friendly, very positive light of, hey, how do we address this before it becomes an issue?
Well, it's really the school district that needs to push
Yes.
Yeah, for
So,
sure. 'cause that's
reaching out to
a
the
huge
school
issue
district, I
for
think,
us
would be helpful.
I just make sure that
Yeah,
they're aware of it.
I'll be sure to pass this along, and you're right, and you're pushing a lot of traffic on the Navy corridor, which is already notoriously busy and bad, so.
Well, I just think if you guys had a response or something at that elementary school, it should be the nightmare. Everybody's trying to leave, and you're trying to get in, and there's one road, how does that work?
Yeah, it's gonna be a little congested.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pass this on to our prevention guys, make sure they're very aware of this, and
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll continue to give you updates on this as things happen and things move along, but we'll get up to speed now.
Alright, Jonathan, engineering standards updates, one of my favorite things personally. Hey Jonathan, here's the.
Oh, thank you. Where do you want?
Hey, how are you? No, please have a seat, we're just switching presenters. We're just having a conversation about a safety concern on a road. So this new road, it's a nice line. So, so great.
And we need to get that closer. What request do you have?
You do, and I expect you to study it.
There will be a test.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else want a copy? Did you get one? No.
It's important. It's very, very important.
Alright, so, this is session 2. We talked just a little bit before. Let me just jump here to here. We're going to talk about section 3 of our standards update. The intention for section 3 is essentially to take a developer or anyone who wants to do something on land and take them from planning commission approval, tell them how to get from there to issuance of building permit. This is obviously a very skeletonized, simplified version of how to get there, but this is it. So section 3 of the standards is intended to help a developer go step by step and do that. And so what I wanted to do is explain the key changes and highlights. Now, one thing to bear in mind is a lot of this is actually not new. It was just pulled from different areas where it existed prior and put into this spot. This is the general outline for section 3. And again, this is the more detailed version of that prior graphic, but you go all the way from, we talked about easements and agreements, all the way down through inspection and bond release. Alright, so I'm going to just kind of walk you through some key changes and updates. We talked about this last time just a little bit, so this is on page 3.2, paragraph 3.2. We now get into the details of what permits we expect prior to final engineering review and then prior to construction. And then on page 3.3, paragraph 3.202, the city permits. One change here is there were a handful of permits at the city to do any work within the right-of-way. We've now consolidated this to just one permit. It's called a land disturbance permit, and we've just provided a link on there that they can either fill out online or print and download and bring it to the city.
But it will include everything that we need.
It will include that, and in addition to, as far as...
For the city permits considered, we're consolidating all into one process.
And I wouldn't say all, right, because you have building permits.
Okay.
But as far as the permits that engineering department worked with, it brings down to one permit. And that even includes, prior there was a grading permit. So we had a call prior, this would encompass that.
So will this, will we have to do a new fee schedule, permit fee schedule for these, or is there no?
No, so the fees all remain the same as before, and it's all in, now just put into one location now.
Okay.
Page 3.3, paragraph 3.3, called Hillside Development. This used to be 4.5 pages long, and it was just reciting the ordinance. So what we decided to do was just say, go to the ordinance. So we took 4.5 pages out of the standards. That is also changing. That portion of the ordinance, has changed as of last year, and so to allow that to change as needed without us having to update standards, we just simply referred to that. Paragraphs 3.4 and 3.5, so that's called the preliminary plan review and the final plan review. That just gives a bit of an explanation of those milestones, what happens after you get your planning commission approval, and now you're moving, once they get that, they move on to the final plan review, which means now engineering is taking a fine-tuned look at the plans, making sure it complies with the manual.
I have a question on this. If we, let's say that we have a final approval on, let's say, a road alignment by the planning commission, and it comes back to the final engineering review, and it's discovered, for example, there's a water right of way or something that can't be disturbed, would it then have to go back to the planning commission for reapproval based on the engineering update?
That's an interesting example. I don't think it would be, because that would be in the ordinance that says if it's and John, you can help me understand if I say this wrong, but if it's a minor adjustment, those don't necessarily constitute a need to come back to planning commission.
But if it's a more substantial, like they have to completely move the road alignment.
Depending on, I guess, how substantial that would be, if it changes the concept of neighboring developments that have been
Who
approved.
makes that determination?
If you prune like 100 or 200 feet, yes, but if it's 5 feet, 20 feet to move out of the way of that alignment.
I think the alignment is something, I don't know, a little ambiguous. Maybe it's the connection onto the next property. If it has to wipe out the connection to the next property, that's something we'd come in. But if it changed the alignment and it came out, but came back in and tied in at point A and point B at the same point, so it connected to
What
the next
about
property.
moving the location of a building? Like if on a plat, on a platted building for a final approval, let's say, so I'm looking at this from residential buildings. Let's say we have an HOA that comes in and they wanna make a change to move the location of the building closer to another building. Would that be considered substantial by staff? Would that have to go back through the review process?
We would go back to the planning department, so if they have in their PUD, if they're, as long as they're, because the planning commission's gonna give them the side yard offsets. And if they stay within that side yard offset, we'll probably handle the staff. If they wanna encroach upon what's been approved by the planning
If they want
commission.
a variance.
My
Then we'll go back to
bigger
planning.
concern is, for example, with an HOA that has 400 townhomes that wants to come in and change, they wanna push the houses further, closer to the street because they're trying to squeeze in more units or
If they're
whatever
getting
it
more
is.
use, have to go back to planning.
Sure, but we've seen this before in the past in our city where developers come in and they try to, they're realigning things slightly to make things work that probably should have gone back to the community for discussion. And so my concern would be that if that happens after the planning commission has approved, that should go back to the planning commission. It sounds like there is a mechanism to say that, substantial versus, non-substantial changes. I have some concerns that particular language could be abused to.
But there's
to do
minimum
things.
setbacks that are established for all of these areas,
Mhm.
and I think obviously, I think
But when you're
my
talking about,
experience there,
but when you start talking about private roads, a lot of those go away.
I don't think the minimum setbacks don't go away when you're talking private roads. So as long as they still fall within those minimum setbacks required, established by that and established through that review process, then obviously they wouldn't need to come back.
And I don't wanna be misunderstood here, I'm not saying that, I just wanna make sure that as this is the time to review these questions. And so I would just ask that as we're going through these reviews and talking about that, we make sure that we're specifically trying to avoid any issues of making changes that would substantially affect the community outside of the normal public process that we have, and so just keeping.
Well, there's always a cap, all of the approvals that, my time on the planning commission, all of those approvals always, had the standard that they had to meet, the engineering standards, and they had to meet all of those, and so that language is always gonna be in there, but I do know that anytime that there was a substantial, change, which, I guess those seem to be pretty rare for those substantial changes, because they've done a lot of that engineering up front. But I know that the planning department is always very good at, there is a substantial change, that it was always brought back, at the very least, an update to the planning commission that had seen that previously, and then if there was a concern at the planning commission, then they could always take it back, whichever route it needed to go, which was formal agenda item in the planning commission or back. Obviously, they'd always bring it back to the council if there was a question there, so.
It's a concern mostly, I just wanna make sure that as we're going through this process, we're making sure that we're keeping that in mind, that's really the concern. I trust staff to try to make great determinations, I just don't wanna see those processes, staff abused with somebody trying to do something that maybe they shouldn't.
Page 3.5, city fees, there's no change in fees, so to be clear there is no change in a fee. What we're doing now is we just listed the types of fees that potentially could exist for that development. We just do that for clarity for the developer. Page 3.6, 3-6, This is where things get a little more on the substantial change and have more implications to developers. If you recall my nice simplified exhibit at the beginning, we had at the very bottom, it said issuance of building permit, and that was the last item to go. State statute is now asking that we don't hold up substantial completion of a subdivision infrastructure in its entirety before they can get a building permit application submitted.
Submitted or approved?
Issuance.
So issued.
Jonathan?
Yeah.
I don't mean to make you go back, but under your city bonds, it says the credit agreement allowing for presentation by fax or other electronic means acceptable to the city. Do you guys still accept that?
Will you show me what that share?
It's just
It's right here. Your
page
letter.
3.3.
You probably should
Yes.
eliminate it.
Okay, yeah.
We get lots of
John,
faxes.
that's your
It's
verbiage
crazy,
you gave to
so-
us. Maybe we'll go back to John and talk to him and,
You can ask about that.
yeah,
Before we talk about getting rid of fax
I'll get
or
with you.
electronic
There was a paragraph you gave us one back. Sorry, Mayor.
Sorry, I know that in the business world, fax is still used quite substantially in many
Especially some legal
circumstances.
Yeah,
documents.
Equifax, most of them.
We've not been able to get away from it, we wish we could.
I just don't wanna see us take away a relatively standard business process. You know, I think there'll come a day where that's appropriate, but I'm not sure we've quite hit that yet, so I would.
We have the word fax in a lot of places that we should probably take a look at, but anyway, so John, I'll get with you on that. Alright, so what is now being stated in the state statute is that we cannot withhold issuance of a building permit if they have installed essential infrastructure and they've bonded for the infrastructure that they're not installing. And so what we have added into the standard here, just to make sure that we don't leave any unnecessarily vulnerable items, is we say, first off, we define essential infrastructure, and we've met with the Home Builders Association, we've met with Chris Gambralis of Ivory to make sure we're kind of in line with the understanding of that state statute. And essential infrastructure, based on our current understanding, is a commissioned water system that passes the fire flow test. So we've required that essentially in the standard to have the fire flow test show that it has adequate fire flow and that it's been commissioned. Also, this third bulleted item is that it's have an all-weather surface installed on the frontage of the lot that has the building permit.
Which is not pavement.
Which is not necessarily pavement, and it's a properly compacted road base.
But it has to be maintained.
So what, Blake worked with some surrounding cities on how to address that and has written up a specification for a temporary road. If they elect not to do the full completion of the roadway as their all-weather surface, the second option is that they can install a temporary road as specified in the section. Now, the very last page of your packet, it shows that specification. I just wanted to point out one thing in that specification. So on the very last page, this will be a portion that will get put into section 5 of the standards, and essentially it's item B, which is saying the temporary road would require that they put in lieu of the asphalt, they actually put road base on top of the originally required layer thickness of base course material. So let's just say, for example, you have 6 inches road base over 3 inches asphalt. They would need to install 9 inches, which is the sum of those two, of road base. And there's some times where they have to maintain it. They would also have to remove that when it comes time for substantial completion and put asphalt over. So there's some things that just making sure that we're not. What's that?
Kind of discourages them from
Well,
doing
it
that.
maintains the structural integrity of.
What it does is a couple of things. If they set their curb and gutter and then they leave the asphalt out, the curb and gutter gets chipped and beat up while they're constructing homes. And then the other thing is the utilities underneath have that less coverage over them, that structural support. So if you add that onto it, now your water lines and everything are a little bit more protected than they were before. So those are the two main things that helps.
And we could bring this back when it comes time to discuss section 5. We just wanted to kind of let you know this is somewhat of a draft response that Blake and I have been working on, mostly Blake and working other cities, just kind of getting a feel for what's going on how they're just trying to protect from any potential vulnerables with that state statute. Page 3-7, paragraph 3.11. Warranty period requirements. So now what we've stated here is there's some specific requirements that we want to point out to let me back up. When a developer gets substantial completion, essentially we are accepting the improvements, but the developer has to warranty it for a year. And we spell out in this section that there's two things that they need to do, and that's maintain the landscaping
Which
for that
section are we
warranty
talking about,
period.
sorry?
3.11.
Yeah, paragraph 3.11. So we're telling the developer that they're in charge of maintaining, keeping it watered, mowed, as far as landscaping, that they would be required to maintain that for that year. Obviously, at the end of that warranty period, then we would take a look to see if that landscaping is taken hold. So that would be a requirement. Also on streetlights. Let me back up. So these items we've been requiring already. Now it's just being stated in standards. I shouldn't say requiring. We've been asking them to do that.
So on this warranty part that we're talking about, and this is just a question, this is not looking for a right or wrong answer, would this apply to, once we update the entire code, would this also apply to private roads?
You know what, sorry man, I got distracted on something here. I must have pointed out the wrong paragraph.
Because I'm looking at this going, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, but we go to the next page.
But we don't hold warranty for private roads. As soon as they're
That's
substantially
3.11.07.
complete, we release all
1107.
bond. They are owned by the developer or HOA at that point.
At the HOA, okay, it's just a question.
Did that answer your question there?
Yes, it does.
So sorry, so paragraph is 3.11.07. Sorry about that, thanks for pointing that out. So it'll state there a little clearly. And then the other item is street lighting. The developer is in charge of paying for the power for that street light for that warranty period.
And that's a little different because the streetlights that are on just a single pole without the arm, those are hooked up through transformers and we pay a fee dawn to dusk for the public streets on those. If it's got an arm, then it's metered and then they would have to pay for that metered light. So it's only developments that would be along a collector road or an arterial road.
Did you get any pushback on that?
Blake, you might be able to speak to that a little better.
Pretty rare right now. We don't have a lot of those, so. No. No, because we haven't had a lot of them.
All right, and then lastly, the larger change here is previously we required as-built drawings. Now we require what's called record drawings. There's a significant difference in the label of that. As-built means that they're going out and they're shooting it with their conventional survey equipment, and they hand it to us. Harriman City's GIS department does that, and so what we've asked them to do is provide us a record drawing, which is essentially marking on the plans any deviations from the approved plans that are, field adjustments that they've made, and they just need to point that out to us.
So we have it correctly in the records.
Correctly in the records, and we already, like I say, we have it at the as-built condition quantified from our GIS department already. So again, this is the end of my presentation here, the end of section 3. So
Good job.
thank you guys, you made it through.
All right, before we move on to item 3.11, I know it's not 6:45,
I
but
think it's actually perfect.
perfect timing.
I think it's.
So for the public awareness, we will be taking a short break.
Actually, a field trip to
A
the
field
South
trip
Florida.
outside.
Still public.
Did you wanna
It's
do
still, public is still
south
welcome
side
to.
steps? Did we wanna do these updates before? We have 2 items that
Okay.
we've got.
So we'll come back and.
1 and 2, so what do you, oh, you have,
I don't think we can get through all that fast.
Are we still having a discussion on the number of data where it was featured?
yeah.
Yes,
We're gonna have
Gordon.
to still have to come back and have these conversations. It's just, we want to make sure that those that are waiting for us outside we're using
There's nobody out there yet.
okay.
They're waiting for you to show up first.
So should we?
This is also
Just
just
go
go
stand
let's
on
just
the
go do this
stairs
thing.
right
Well,
outside
we need the
south
grand
side.
entrance for the
So-
grand entrance.
Oh,
With that, we will
For the grand
go
exit
ahead
for
and
the
move
grand-
outside.
Mayor, I need to get
Something like that.
from
All right. I go to the restroom, or am I gonna miss something?
You're gonna miss something.
Oh.
But you can go before you put it back,
What's that?
before we start again.
You don't
Oh,
want
I'm
to
missing
miss.
one. What's that?
You don't want to miss.
I don't wanna miss